notes and eventful because we went through all that before this morning, and we're getting started this afternoon session of us after the Justice session of the Justice and Home Affairs Council of Ministers under the German presidency, of which I just took part, will lead us to point 6, situation at the Greek-Turkish border and respect for fundamental rights. We are to hear a series of presentations, nothing less than 6 guest speakers for a couple of hours. So let's do our best, as usual, to stick to the timing. First of all, following a comprehensive exchange of views on the situation in Greece at the beginning of April, coordinators decided to come back today to discuss the situation on the Greek-Turkish border in evolution and current state of play, respect of fundamental rights, notably right to asylum. This exchange is meant to inform the Libe Committee's work on the future reform of the common European asylum system, as well as legislative and non-legislative emergency responses in cases of high number of third country nationals crossing the borders in or in need of protection under existing legislation. We're having here Ministers Chrisochoidis and Mitarachi. We welcome them. We're having also in our committee alternate Minister for Migration and Asylum, Mr. Koumoutsakos. 3 members of the Greek government in this session of us, along with Commissioner Johansson, constitute a first panel of speakers. Then there will be a second panel, namely Fabrice Leggeri, Director of Frontex, and Mr. Notis Mitarachi, Legal Officer at Refugee Support Aegean. Let's hear from the panel of Greek ministers. I suggest Ministers Chrisochoidis and Mitarachi will be having 5 minutes each. Then the alternate ministers, an additional 3-5 minutes, and finally the Commissioner, let's say 6-8 minutes, and then there will be a first round of questions and answers. From the Libe coordinators, 2 minutes each, I guess, and then floor back to the speakers and the Commissioner for responses and replies, 3 minutes each. In that kind of a frame, we'll manage to encapsulate this intense round of speakers for the next 2 hours. Considering that as a second panel, without further ado, let's give the floor to the first Greek ministers. And the first of them will be Mr. Chrisochoidis. If you are there connected, the floor is yours for the next 5 minutes. Mr. Chrisochoidis, there you are. Thank you for being here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ευχαριστώ πολύ, κύριε Πρόεδρε. Σας ευχαριστώ πολύ για την πρόσκληση.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you for the invitation. It is a great pleasure and an honor to be with you today. This is the third discussion we are having with the Libe Committee, and we have the opportunity to talk about these issues that have to do with guarding our borders as well as asylum and migration policy. Now, after the mass of around 60,000 people on the Greek-Turkish border in this past March, we have had this mass concentration of 60,000 people. So there was an attempt on the side of Turkey to make thousands of people enter into the Greek territory in order to serve the political plans of President Erdoğan and Turkey. And I think that the whole of Europe has seen the way in which we protected our borders. No one was allowed to go through, and at the same time, Turkey did not succeed in its effort to use these people for its own aims. So we kept Greece standing up, Europe standing up, we kept our borders safe, and I have to say that we're still there in place. Our forces are standing by in order that nothing like that will be repeated. At the same point, there are also forces from Frontex. They have the same duties as the Greek forces, and they monitor everything that happens in the area. And I would like to tell you that this situation concerning the security of our borders is becoming permanent. And I can reassure you that Greece is guarding the European border in an efficient way, and we are not going to allow anyone to use these borders for other political and strategic aims. I would like to say that this year, in 2020, the flows have been reduced significantly, and I realize that this is due to the events that took place in March with Turkey, but also due to the COVID, due to the pandemic. So as a result, the flows right now in the first semester are 50% lower. In the second semester of 2019, we had an increase, and if the situation goes on like that, then we will also have a fall in the second semester as well. What we aim at, and we think it should be European policy, is to have a true European border guard corps, a true operational Frontex with a few thousand border guards that will be at the crucial points of the European borders and protect the European borders, always respecting human rights, human life, always respecting the people that are in need of international protection, but at the same time keeping European borders safe from a lot of dangers that arise from today's turbulent reality that is becoming more turbulent by the day, because the wider area of the southeastern Mediterranean is very fluid right now. So, first thing for us is to set up a proper operational Frontex and send forces at the crucial points. The second issue I would like you to be aware of has to do with returns. Returns, as you know, are very hard. We're talking about the people for whom it has been decided that they are not entitled to international protection. It is very hard. Turkey has not answered to us yet if they want to start returns again based on the EU-Turkey agreement. We have yet to receive an answer. This is our second diplomatic note. We have asked them to take back people that have requested asylum and they have not received it. We are expecting an answer. We want to have a dialogue with Turkey, always, of course, in the framework of the respect of the agreements, so that all of these things will take place for mutual benefit. Now, concerning returns, we are trying, in cooperation with Frontex and with other EU member states, to organize and coordinate these returns to third countries. And we have this very important initiative by the European Commission for voluntary returns, which are also very important. Finally, let me say this. We wish and we are working towards, as a country, so that in the near future, I mean during the German presidency, we will have a new EU migration and asylum policy. I think it will be a step forward for the EU. However, on the other hand, we believe that it is important to safeguard our borders, to be safe, to stop any attempt at crossing, not just by humans, but also by weapons, by substances, trafficking in general, so that the European citizen will be safe and will feel safe. So we would like to say that what we have been doing since March will continue, and every day the European border in the area of southern Eastern Europe, and I'm talking about the land border and the sea border in this area, will be totally safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Chrisochoidis, for your effort to summarize your views and spare some time for your colleagues, which are about to complete the presentation of the Greek view on the matter. Let's move to Minister Mitarachi. The floor is yours for the next... Yes, there you are, for the next 5 minutes. There you go.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your very kind invitation. To start, in the previous meeting of LIBE on the 2nd of April, many members raised severe concern about the health situation in the camps given the pandemic, and I am pleased to report that on this first stage of the pandemic, up to today, we have had 0 incidents in the camps in the islands and 0 loss of life in the country related to the asylum seekers. Positive news, I think. Now, regarding migration flows, as Michalis said, we have experienced a 46% decrease in the first half of the year and a 92% decrease in the quarter. However, still we have had 9,874 arrivals in 2020, a substantial number, adding pressure to an already overcrowded reception system in the islands and to our asylum services. The police and Coast Guard are working hard to protect our national borders, at the same time the borders of the European Union. Issues that the European Parliament, I understand, is scheduled to discuss in plenary on Thursday, following an EPP initiative regarding Turkish aggression. We're all aware how migration has been used as a means to promote geopolitical objectives and the current situation at the Aegean Sea. To respond to this challenge, a series of decisions have been taken, including the reinforcement of the operations carried out in the front line, and the leadership of the European Union was there in Evros to see what was happening firsthand. Now also the Coast Guard surveillance activities have significantly enhanced, focusing on the early detention of migrant boats prior to their entry into the EU waters to prevent an unauthorized border crossing. The border activities at the Eastern Aegean resulted in safeguarding public health amidst the COVID pandemic. However, I need to note that the cooperation with the Turkish Coast Guard remains challenging. Greece is placing particular emphasis in protecting human life. And I should note, we only had 1 incident this year involving loss of life at sea. We lost 1 person, still a very sad event, but materially less than what happened in the previous years. Now, with regard to the situation in the islands, I should note that we transferred from the islands to the mainland in the first half of 2020, 17,000 people, compared to 7,000 last year in the same period. That is an increase of 134%. And despite the flows I described before, we have reduced residents in the camps by 23% since the beginning of the year, now to 29,000 from 38,000. And despite new arrivals and despite the pressure of the pandemic, we issued 46,000 asylum decisions, an increase of 88% year on year. We believe it is fundamentally important to issue fair decisions, but also in a timely manner. And now we have 100,000 cases left compared to 140,000 pending at the beginning of the year. Very quick 4 points that I would like to emphasize. First, the need to upgrade the quality of our reception capacity by upgrading or replacing existing camps, starting with Samos, Kos and Leros, and quickly followed by Lesbos and Chios. We have approval in principle by the Commission, and we're now waiting for specific project approval so we can proceed with tenders. And as I mentioned on the 2nd of April, it is critical to finalize funding. Second, it's important to upgrade the security of the camps and the digital transformation of the asylum processes. Thirdly, we're placing a lot of more emphasis in integration, working with the International Organization of Migration, implementing the Helios program, helping recognize refugees to enter the job market, find a house and get trained into fundamental skills. And it is critical for Europe to continue funding of this program as it's supposed to end at the end of November. Finally, we need to accelerate returns for those not entitled to international protection, and enhancing returns needs to be a key part of the new pact on migration and asylum. Mr. Chair, please accept my apologies as I need to leave the call as I have to attend the plenary of the National Parliament in 15 minutes, as it's going to be a 3-hour debate on migration starting, called by the opposition. However, the alternate minister, Mr. George Koumoutsakos, a former member of the European Parliament, will remain on the call, offer his remarks, and answer all points raised in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mitarachi. Now it's precisely Mr. Koumoutsakos, the third speaker in this round of presentations due to the Greek government, the Greek point of view on the matter. Mr. Koumoutsakos, are you there? If you're connected, the floor is yours.
Mr. Koumoutsakos, please press your speak button.
Mr. Koumoutsakos, speak button. Speak button.
You can't hear us.
And
actually.
raise the mic so that we can hear you. Can you be heard of? No?
Mr. Koumoutsakos, please press the speak button.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Okay.
Yes, thank you. Good evening to everyone. I will add some points from my side regarding the topic that Libe Committee is discussing this evening. Since the events of at the EU-Turkish borders at the region of Evros last February and March, nothing is the same at the overall management of the migration question. Greece, thanks also to the support of its European partners, was very successful in tackling this effort of massively violating its borders. Nonetheless, at no point a new attempt of pushing forward migrants to Greece and the EU should be excluded. We remain vigilant, and we should, all of us, be prepared for preventing any new attempt of this kind. This pressure is becoming even more challenging as the risk of the COVID-19 has not been fully overcome, yet new arrivals need to be quarantined in distinct and separate areas. This is an additional burden for the Greek authorities and especially the overcharged facilities at the Aegean Islands. Greece and the EU are obliged to show their readiness in effectively tackling the challenge that remains significant. In this sense, we have put in place initiatives aiming at decongesting the islands and ensuring dignified human conditions for those reaching our country. One important element of our policy is to accelerate the returns of those who are not entitled to asylum. In this regard, we have taken the initiative of enhancing, with the support of the EU and the Commission, which we thank, we have taken the initiative of enhancing assisted voluntary returns through the AVRR program already used so far by around 800 persons in 2020. A new mechanism for assisted voluntary returns for up to 5,000 people actually located in the islands of Eastern Aegean and having arrived no later than the 1st of January is being set up. The implementation of the project is coordinated with the relevant actors and is planned to take place despite the difficulties imposed by the current pandemic. The first flight towards Iraq is scheduled to take place in this month. More importantly, we are in the process of implementing the initiative of relocation of more than 1,200 unaccompanied minors from a total of approximately 4,800 actually located in Greece, which has been kindly supported by a group of willing EU member states under the coordination of the European Commission. This is an important priority of the Greek government for a series of humanitarian reasons. Up to now, 11 EU partners have expressed their willingness to accept unaccompanied minors together with 2 more states, non-EU members, namely Norway and Serbia. More than 120 children have been already relocated. We strongly believe that this initiative should lead the way in terms of the much-needed solidarity and shared responsibility in support of the overburdened frontline countries like Greece. At no point, however, this voluntary and much appreciated act of European solidarity should be a substitute for a real, effective and mandatory solidarity and burden share through the relocation of asylum seekers among all EU member states. This is probably the most significant point that we are pushing forward ahead of the upcoming negotiations for a new European Migration and Asylum Pact, together with the other frontline European member states. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, now we have completed the round of... Yes, we have. Yes, I was saying right. We have completed the round of Greek ministers. Now we still to hear Commissioner Johansson before turning to the questions and answers first round with coordinators. So let's hear from Commissioner, Home Commissioner. You're welcome to take the floor, Commissioner Johansson. Now we hear you. Yes, please. Ilva,
yes,
there you go.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, all honourable members of the LIBE Committee. You have called this meeting because you have concerns about events reported at the Greek-Turkish border. Concerns about reports of pushbacks, violence and abuse. And this is concerns that I share. Pushbacks are clearly forbidden. Everyone has the right to apply for asylum. All allegations of pushbacks, abuse, violence must be investigated. We expect the national authorities to do so. The Commission has no power to investigate alleged misconduct of Member States' law enforcement authorities. However, in this, as in other cases, we expect national authorities to investigate with a view to establish the facts and to properly follow up on any wrongdoing if they find any. Now, this afternoon, we are discussing Greece. But it's not only about Greece. This concerns all our external borders. I receive reports of pushbacks and violations of rights from more than one external borders, incidents that need to be investigated. We can't protect our European border by violating European values, by violating people's rights. Frontex, which already has a compliant mechanism and fundamental rights officers, has an important role to play, and does so. In my view, it's time to consider if we also need to put in place a new mechanism to monitor and verify reports of pushbacks. To me, it is clear that we need to do more to ensure that Member States comply with the EU law and fundamental rights when they protect our external borders. Having said so, or made this clear, may I also take this opportunity to update you on the progress that has been made in migration management in Greece. where the Commission is involved. When I took office 7 months ago, there had been many years of huge support from the Commission towards Greece. But the last 6 months, we've seen significant progress, even though, of course, some huge challenges still remain. When Corona started, I think we were all afraid. Many of us was afraid that the virus should hit the overcrowded camps on the Greek islands. If so happened, it would be a disaster. Thanks to hard work and good cooperation, we could avoid that situation. Together, the Commission and the Greek government carried out an emergency plan to stop the virus from reaching the camps. And this has been successful. There are still 0 corona cases in the camps. That may, of course, change, but let's remember that 3 months ago, when we had this discussion in the Liberties Committee, I think very few of us thought that this was possible. We took steps to protect people most at risk, old people, sick people. 3,000 vulnerable people have now been identified and are being moved out of the camps. Another important progress that also has been mentioned here is the relocation of unaccompanied minors, children and teenagers living on their own in unacceptable conditions. Since we last discussed in April, Member States have increased their pledges and many more countries have come on board. So I can announce that tomorrow 25 children and teenagers will find a welcome in Portugal. And on Wednesday, 25 more will find a welcome in Finland. And we have an ongoing process to send all these unaccompanied minors, and also now including sick children with their families, to welcoming states. Greece has also made progress when it comes to asylum applications. There's been a substantial increase in the resources of the actors handling migration issues. That's why the last 6 months, Greece issued more than 45 asylum decisions, greatly reducing the backlog, nearly double compared to the same period last year. Around 20,000 were positive, around 18,000 were negative. We hope that returns can soon resume, including to Turkey. Already 515 people applied to our voluntary return program, especially from Afghanistan and Iraq. The new Greek law aims to shorten the asylum process with shorter deadlines and streamlined procedures. Following objections from the Commission and others, the Greek government have amended the draft law. Lack of suitable accommodation can no longer be a justification for detaining minors. That's good. Lack of interpretation can no longer justify omitting interviews. That's good. The Greek authorities have assured the Commission that asylum seekers will be able to access and exit reception centres, will not be closed but monitored. The Commission will continue to monitor implementation to make sure it's in line with the EU law. Minister Mitarachi also mentioned the importance of integration. One recognized refugees start a new life in Greece. People need support to leave the reception centres and integrate fully into society. From our side, the Commission side, our funds support the Helios project. This helps the integration of refugees into Greek society, and there is a need to scale up this process. I thank the 3 Greek ministers for being here today, for good collaboration and real progress made in many ways. But to return to today's topic, I share the concerns that actually called for this meeting. Pushbacks are illegal. All incidents need to be investigated and follow up. Fundamental rights must be respected. I call on the Greek authorities to follow up on all reported illegal activities and to do what's properly when investigated them. Not everybody is entitled to asylum status, but everyone is entitled to treatment according to our values. When people apply for asylum, they appeal to European values, and that appeal we must honor. Thank you.
It's quite a landscape on the views of situation as it stands. In Greece, we heard from the Greek ministers involved in the management, but also from the European Commission. And as I said, we are well in time, doing well. I open now the floor for the first round of discussion with the coordinators, questions and answers. Okay, we're getting started with the EPP for this point. It'll be Elisabeth Votsenberg. Elisabeth Votsenberg, maybe Vrianidi, maybe on the screen, maybe remote, I don't know. Is she connected? Mrs. Votsenberg?
Mrs. Vosenberg?
Nope. Yes, are you there?
Mrs. Vosenberg?
Με ακούτε παρακαλώ?
Mrs. Vosenberg?
Μάλιστα. Με ακούτε?
Can you hear me? Thank you very much, Chairman. I would also like to thank Commissioner Johansson and the three Greek ministers for the detailed report that they gave to us concerning the migration issue as well as the guarding of the external European border. Dear colleagues, we know that for the past 5 years, Greece has been bearing the brunt of the issue, totally respecting the rights of migrants and refugees while safeguarding the European borders, while at the same time following European and international law concerning the rights of these people. On the other hand, we have Turkish propaganda running amok. We know that in March what we had was a blackmail against Greece with the use of these 60,000 people, as Mr. Chrisochoidis mentioned, at our northern border on the Evros River. And what happened was done in total respect of international law, and everyone recognized that Greece was very effective in safeguarding the European borders. Despite that, just the other day, Mr. Çavuşoğlu, the foreign minister of Turkey, said that this is over just until the pandemic is over. So the threat is still there, and for that reason, Greece, always respecting the rules and legislation, has promised that it is going to safeguard the borders. At the same time, we have an invisible enemy that is acting against my country. There has been some fake news going around for the past 4 months that allegedly we have had victims, or that we have had pushbacks, as Ms. Johansson mentioned, either on the border on Evros or on the islands. This is not only not true, but unfortunately, these fake news have also been adopted by part of the foreign press, and that means that Greece is being slandered without any proof. So, this report is against a country that has rescued hundreds of desperate people, literally plucked them out of the sea. So I would like to ask Mr. Chrisochoidis if the coordination center at... Yes, just... So I would like to ask the minister if they have had any reports either for victims or for any illegal action on the Greek side, if they have looked into it and what was the result, because the Greek Prime Minister has said that everything will be done under full transparency, and there are no pushbacks. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Now, for the S&D, it'll be Señor Ruiz de Besa.
¿Cuánto tiempo?
About 2 minutes each.
Okay.
About.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. I think I'll come away from today's meeting feeling more worried than when I came in. Having heard 3 Greek ministers speaking, what I would say, with all due respect to Ministers Chrisochoidis, Ministers Mitarachi and Chrisochoidis, I don't hear of narrative that would be fitting for the centre-right. It would sound much more extreme than that, where migrants are being described as a negative phenomenon, and the ultimate goal is to have sealed borders that are watertight borders. And I don't know, when you talked about early detection, Minister Mitarachi, early detention before entering into Greek waters, that's what I heard. So detaining people at international waters before they are able to enter European waters. Now, this idea of an impenetrable border does not really sit well with the idea of allowing individuals to seek international protection. So it's clear, hearing this, that the government has no intention to facilitate this possibility and to act in accordance with the most basic fundamental rights. So I can understand and agree with what you say about the need for a compulsory relocation mechanism in Europe for those migrants who've been rescued at sea. But while we wait for this, we can't really seal off the border in this way, and we think that those measures are really unacceptable. Now, I'd like to put a very concrete question to Minister Mitarachi, if I may. In the Spiegel newspaper on the 6th, we read of cases where Greek coast guards, masked coast guards, were firing at sea and allowing migrants, leaving them to their fate. So I wonder what can be done to avoid this kind of situation ever occurring again. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Chair.
For Renew, Mrs. Interveld. Sophie.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thanks to the speakers. First of all, Madam Commissioner, because I've listened to the Greek ministers and our Greek EPP colleagues saying that everything's fine, and they are, protecting the borders on our behalf, which is fair, which is true, and they are receiving a large number of refugees. But as the Commissioner said, that has to be done within the limits of the law. Everybody has to respect the law. But my problem is that every time we discuss this with the Commissioner, her argument stops there. Pushbacks are not allowed. Case closed. No, pushbacks are not allowed. But if we get alarming reports again and again and again that pushbacks are taking place, even at gunpoint, that we're even looking at possible deadly victims, then I'm sorry, Madam Commissioner, it's simply not good enough to say, oh, that's not allowed. It's like saying, stealing is not allowed. Hey, but they're thieves. So investigate, Commission, that is your responsibility, come on. But the bigger issue here is, of course, that, again, we find ourselves discussing this issue, and those of us who've been around for longer have done so countless times. Every time we're talking about Greece, we're talking about the EU external borders, we're talking about the situation in the camps, on the islands. And for years we keep saying that the situation is unacceptable, untenable, and we adopt another resolution and we submit another parliamentary question, and it never, ever ends. But it has to end, and there the Commission has a responsibility. Look, the situation in Greece is symptomatic of a European problem. The Greek border is a European border. The refugees in Greece are refugees in Europe. They are a common responsibility. So we desperately need a plan for a comprehensive asylum and migration policy. And we've been waiting for that for months and months and months, and we keep getting signals that it's going to be pushed back further and further. And we need for the Commission to stop catering to the unconstructive and the uncooperative member states. Start working with the majority of member states who desperately want a common European policy. Now, I would like to know why the Commission is currently negotiating a deal with the member states, rather than taking its responsibility and doing its duty on the basis of the treaties, making a legislative proposal and then leave it to the two legislators, the Council and the Parliament, to take position. I very much warn the Commission that the treaties do not allow for the Commission to legislate together with the Council and then come to the European Parliament just for a signature on the dotted line. We will not play that game. We have done our legislative job as a serious body. We urgently need a comprehensive solution. Yes, sorry, colleague, I'm overrunning my time. And we expect the Commission to take leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Sintveld. Now for the Greens, it will be Mr. Markart. Sie haben das Wort. No, it's Tineke Strik. Okay, you've got the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and also thanks to the speakers. Mohammed El Arab, a young man from Syria, shot at the 2nd of March. Mohammed Gulzar, a Pakistani citizen, shot and he died at the 4th of March. Mohammed Hantu, a man from Syria. Zishan Omar, a man from Pakistan, both severely wounded. These are the names of the victims that have been identified so far after the shootings on the Greek-Turkish border. And we still have 4 other casualties which have not been identified yet. And it's due to the tremendous work of a team of investigative journalists that we have this clear evidence on the table. And if we want justice to be done, we need a political assessment of these facts and a firm response from the EU level. So far, the Greek government has responded incoherently. First, it dismissed all this as fake news, and then it said that the bullets came from the Turkish side. So that means there have been bullets. There have been attacks on the Greek border. And now today, they even managed, the 3 of the ministers, to avoid the topic completely, although this was clearly on the agenda of these hearings. So I really want to have their answers on, did they do an investigation, and what is their answer to this clear evidence on the table. But this is also about the credibility of the EU as a union need to respect human rights and rule of law. Von der Leyen visited the Greek-Turkish border exactly during those days of the shooting, saying that Greece was acting as a shield for Europe, and that the situation at the border is not only Greece's issue to manage, and this is the responsibility of the European as a whole. I completely underline that. This is a common responsibility, and therefore we need to show solidarity. But if this is a common responsibility, then the Commission also has to ensure a proper response to the conduct of the authorities at these borders, especially now that the Greek authorities are in a complete denial. And so far, the Commission has only remained silent about the victims and the violations, and not at one single moment admitted that those casualties have taken place. And now she does it again. And I would really urge the Commission to take responsibility, because you have the competence as the only body of the EU to ensure compliance and to enforce compliance with EU law. What message does the Commission send to the governments of other member states if it remains silent when people are shot at the doorstep? That all actions are admissible as long as it comes, as people are stopped at the borders. The tendency of increased violence and violations at the EU borders requires a strong response from the Commission, including measures on independent monitoring, but most of all effective enforcement and ban impunity. So I urge the Commission to condemn these shootings at the Greek-Turkish border, investigate how it could happen, and the responsible officials must be held accountable accountable, and measures must be taken to prevent it from happening again. It's also the responsibility of the Commissioner to protect Schengen and asylum rules and to assess the role of agencies such as Frontex. And last but not least, it's the responsibility of the Commission to let the facts prevail over lies and stand by independent journalists who work for this cause. Thank you.
Please, all speakers, particularly the coordinators, do have in mind the time frame for fairness, for the sake of fairness with the rest of the contributions. And in view that we're still having a second panel, but first let's make it complete. We're having this first panel, which is fair enough, full of content, as we may see, and worth debating, that's for sure. So let's hear from ID. It'll be Mr. van der Brische.
Ladies and gentlemen, a few months ago, in March, the start of March, when the crisis at the Greek border was so serious, with the blackmail by Sultan Erdoğan, I visited the sites. I went to talk to the defensive forces there, the border guards, the mayors. They said it was a situation of war there, and this is how we need to appraise the situation. All the people I spoke with, including the taxi drivers themselves, they say we have too few resources to keep these borders tight and protect the rest of Europe. They all are aware that there are many people who want to come to Greece and that they want to integrate is a complete nonsense. Anybody who works on that border is fully aware that these refugees just want to leave Pakistan, Afghanistan, wherever. They want to carry on to the rest of Europe. So I've got a couple of questions, one to our Greek colleagues. Now, do you have sufficient resources? Do you have sufficient support in the meantime? How can we help even more to make sure that we can guard our border in a humane but firm way? And we heard from the border guards that Erdoğan was actually involved in fighting very close, just a few kilometres from the borders. And his prediction was that Erdoğan could use this as a permanent weapon to unleash a new stream of migrants. Have these skirmishes happened? What is the risk that this might happen? Thank you.
Okay, now we move to ECR's coordinator. It'll be Mr. Onorevole Procaccini. Se lei è in collegamento.
Mr. Procaccini, you have the floor.
No, sembra di no.
Seems that he's not connected.
GUE coordinator. This is Frau Ernst. Frau Ernst, Sie haben das Wort.
You have the floor, Madam Ernst, you have the floor. Thank you very much. For months now, Greece has been conducting illegal pushbacks. UNHCR, the Council of Europe, many have raised the alarm of infringements. A video shows how refugees are attacked at the coast and then sent back to Turkey. On the 4th of June 2020, a document shows masked officials destroying the engine of a boat with children on it. Other videos have been shown conducting violence. Also the death of the Syrian man, missing body of Madeira, who was shot off the coast of Greece. This has been documented by Amnesty. And it seems that there have been systematic returns. So my questions to the Greek ministers are very clear. Are you aware that as minister you are responsible for adhering to human rights? Are you prepared then to investigate these act against human rights in a transparent way. Are you prepared to make available the video of the Greek maritime operations? And then to the Commissioner, which sanctions are you going to introduce against the Greeks, against these violations, to put an end to these infringements? Please, I call upon you to act and not just talk. Have you talked to the Greek authorities about the floating borders? Do you consider this barrier in the Mediterranean to be in line with the EU values? I cannot believe that. Thank you.
Okay, now we have heard from the coordinators. Let's be back to our three Greek ministers. Of course, you're more than welcome, but please do your best to honor the direct questions that have been raised on legitimate concerns. I guess I may summarize the spirit of the majority of this Libe Committee, stating the case once again of the obligations that have been endorsed by each and every one of the member states, no matter the difficulties and no matter how hard it is to keep on going without due solidarity from the rest of the member states, of which we do not only complain, but we are also extremely critical, not in due time, but on a permanent basis in every debate we have here in the Libe Committee. But we are also here to stand up when it comes to alleged violations of fundamental rights of asylum seekers once they are in the territory of a European Union member states, which is the case of Greece, not the case of Turkey. It is the case of Greece, not the case of Turkey. And I recall simply that it has been said clearly by Commissioner Johansson that all alleged violations of fundamental rights of asylum seekers being abused, harassed, humiliated, let alone say tortured, at the borders of a European Union member state, be it Greece or Croatia, because recently we have also heard allegations of that kind, worrisome kind, in the Croatian external border of the European Union, have to be thoroughly investigated. So I guess it is a fair case that once again, I know it's not the first time, regrettably so, could not be the last, but I guess it is fair that we hear the very best of our three panelist members, distinguished members of the Greek government, trying to explain what is the truth behind these allegations and what is to be done to make sure that the Commission is serving fully its role as guardian of the treaty and the European law when it comes to respect for the rights of asylum seekers once they have set foot on the soil of a European Union member state. The floor goes back to you. First, Minister, it will be Mr. Chrisochoidis. There you go.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, with all due respect, I would like to say to some of your colleagues that they have to be very careful when they talk about extreme right. Greece has a democratic, progressive government that safeguards human dignity and applies faithfully the law and international law concerning human rights and the Geneva Convention. So this is simply not true. And I would ask you, if you really believe in those values, I would like to ask you to address your government, Mr. Sanchez, to also take some people from the people that have landed in Greece in the past few years. We are a small country. We have tens of thousands of migrants. Last year we had 500 people arriving every single day. And Greece has opened its arms. So it is unacceptable when you talk about far right. And I ask you to take that back. And if you really believe in those values, I would like to ask you to make an effort to convince your government to do something in practice, to have solidarity in practice, and to have a new asylum policy that will really do something. And let me tell you something else. dear sir, we in the last elections managed to keep the far right outside the Greek parliament. Golden Dawn is no longer in the Greek parliament. So they ended up being from the parliament, they ended up in the courts. So this shows how democratic the Greek government and the Greek society is. And I think we're starting to overcome these tendencies we have had due to the crisis these past few years. Now, concerning the issues you mentioned for the pushbacks and the like. Listen, Greece, I mean, you cannot talk like that. Greece is the first, basically the only country after Libya and Morocco have shut down, the only point of entry into the EU for all of those people. So the things you are talking about are simply not there. Also, when you are talking about deaths, I mean, the death of a human being, of a young human being, is something tragic. You cannot talk so easily about deaths. I heard about sharpshooters. I mean, there are no sharpshooters in the Greek police. We did not use guns. It was only police measures. We had thousands of eyes upon us that were present on the spot from all over Europe, all over the world. There are hundreds of media representatives, TV stations. I mean, there were observers, and in the past 3 months, the Frontex is there as well. So you cannot accuse Greece so easily. If there is any allegation, yes, we will. Please send it to us. We will look into it. Now, I would like to answer to Ms. Vosenberg as well. There is the tripartite border, the border with Turkey and Bulgaria at the Kapitan Andreyevo. We also talk about the issues there. Also, there nothing has been proven. This is just claims by Turkey only, and I don't know how they have collected this material that they are presenting from the Turkish soil. So, Greece right now is a country that is bearing the largest part of this. We have a small population with the help of the European Commission, but we are shouldering this weight. And we are going to continue to do that because we, for reasons that are also humanitarian and for reasons of international agreements.
Passion too, Mr. Chrisochoidis, just naturally so. You have exceeded your time, but I understood it was perfectly fair, considering that you have been hard questioned. You were under a hard series of questions. So now I understand that Mr. Mitarachi has left. The second Greek minister has left. So let's move to the third one. It'll be Mr. Koumoutsakos. We thank you for being there, and we thank you again if you make proportionate effort to respond to the points that have been made thoroughly and then please.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, the answer is yes.
Αγαπητοί συνάδελφοι από το Ευρωπαϊκό Κοινοβούλιο, στο οποίο θήτευσα 4-5 χρόνια μια ολόκληρη θητεία.
Dear colleagues in the European Parliament, I was there for 5 years, and this is the first time in my life that someone has called me far right. My philosophy, my way of thinking, and also in my own country, people know me as a moderate politician on the center right. This is unfair criticism, and I mean, really, those words come as a surprise to me. Now, let me go a year back. On the 21st of July 2019, Mr. Çavuşoğlu, the Turkish minister, said the following: if Turkey were to open the floodgates of the migrants, no European country would be stable after 6 months. End of quote. We have had tens of declarations like that ever since. We have had direct threat and blackmail of Europe. So, what was the reaction? What was your reaction when an undemocratic regime effectively announced that they were going to use these desperate people in order to achieve their geostrategic and geopolitical goals, not just in our area, but in Europe as a whole? Where was your sensitivity then? We had a third country that is supposedly connected with the EU, and it was just blatantly using these people. And let me come now to this February and March. We had Ms. von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, as well as the heads of the European institutions and the majority of the member states that congratulated Greece because it acted as an effective shield for EU. So it is now hypocritical that we are called to apologize ex post because we were the shield of the EU. Now, you have to decide what is the role of a country on the front line that at any time can become the victim of an orchestrated attempt to use migrants and refugees in order to achieve their geopolitical goals. Are we going to act as a shield, or are we going to have to answer if we act as a shield? For the rest, I agree with Mr. Chrisochoidis. Greece is a democratic country, and that is not going to change. However, at the same time, we have to safeguard our territory and our security, and we do that always respecting the community acquis and human rights. And one last thing. If there is a second attempt, like the one in Evros, taking place at sea, with hundreds or thousands of people crossing into European soil, at the time when we still have the pandemic of COVID-19, who is going to be responsible of a possible catastrophe on the Greek islands? Because there is no way that we could provide 14 days of quarantine for thousands of people that will come in unannounced and unexpected. So, if the pandemic spreads, who will be responsible then, dear colleagues? And I would like an answer myself now to these questions. So, Greece is a democratic country, and it is not going to move an inch backwards from that. We are a member of the EU, we have the European values, and at the same time we protect our national security and the security of the European borders.
Thank you to Minister Koumoutsakos. We thank you. We thank you for being there, for being ready to say your views, hard as it might seem. And believe me that we have made a case of the lack of solidarity towards Greek exposure to the Mediterranean, and particularly to the Turkish border of the European Union in all, with Turkey through your borders, through Greek borders. We have made a case of solidarity needed and lacking for all too long. But it's also, of course, a matter of the essence that we have a proper and thorough debate every time that there have been alleged violations of asylum-seekers' rights or the right to asylum as it is enshrined in Article 18 of the Charter of Fundamental Rights. That is, I guess, the nature of this conversation of us. Are you willing to state some complementary remark, maybe for a second?
A point of order. Because
point of order?
Yes, because I know the ministers are very upset about the fact that I depicted their views on border management as far right. But I directed a concrete question on the incident of the 16th of June to Minister Mitarachi. He left, and he said that Minister Koumoutsakos will reply on his behalf. So perhaps Minister Koumoutsakos can provide a concrete answer to what happened on the 16th of June regarding the incident and the destruction of the boat, alleged destruction of the boat, the migrant boat by Greek Coast Guards and its abandoning in the sea.
Okay, now we have completed this round. That was a point, just to clarify, but let's move ahead because we still have a second panel. The second panel will include Fabrice, yes? Of course, I'm sorry. I was, of course, I was bypassing Commissioner Johansson. I'm so sorry about that because I was just having in mind that we still have a second panel to go, but we hadn't heard from you. So please, Commissioner Johansson. Floor goes back to you.
Thank you, and I try to keep to my time limit. And I got a few questions from Ms. Intveld, from Ms. Strick, and from Mrs. Ernst, and they are all, I think, concerning the same thing. What will the Commission do? And as I said in my introduction, in my view, it's time now to really consider if we also need to put in place new mechanisms to deal with these concerns that we all share. To me, as I said in my introduction, it's clear that we need to do more to ensure that member states comply with EU law and fundamental rights when they protect our external borders. And I'm ready to make that kind of proposals. And I also think that the Frontex has a very important role to play, and they do. They does really play that role. And I think that we should also consider the role of the agency of European Agency of Fundamental Rights Agency is the right name, I think. So I think that I am ready to consider new initiatives in this area. It's not only about Greece. It's all our external borders. And that's why I also would like to answer the question from Ms. Intveld on the upcoming proposal on the new Migration and Asylum proposal that it's almost finished, but now it probably will be presented in September because we are awaiting the preliminary agreement in the Council on the MFF and the Recovery Fund. And we're also waiting when Parliament will come back in full work again. But for that, I must say that I'm not negotiating with member states or anybody else. The proposal will be the Commission's proposal. And this proposal will be there to protect and defend the right to asylum. And that includes the possibility to apply for asylum. That's a right for everybody to actually do so. And that includes how we properly manage, how we properly protect our borders. And it's not a contradiction to protect our borders at the same time as we are following the fundamental rights and the EU acquis. Let's not go into a trap saying that these are not possible to do together, because it's exactly what we need to do and what we are doing. This is really the important thing. This will be part of my proposal. But I must defend that I'm listening to member states, discussing with member states. I'm listening to European Parliament. I'm discussing with all the political families. I'm listening to and discussing with NGOs and other stakeholders. And in my view, that's a very wise way to do before you present your proposal. When I have presented my proposal in September, then it's up to you in Parliament to negotiate your position, for Council to negotiate their position, and then for the two legislators to negotiate to find the solution that can be accepted and adopted by everybody. And everybody understands this is a difficult task to reach that kind of agreement. The previous Commission was not able to do that. So that's important for me to really listen and discuss before the Commission put the proposal on the table. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think that'll do. Or is it the case that any of the ministers would like still to reply or step in, considering in the point of order there was some additional remark that maybe deserves some reaction from any of the ministers still with us, Mr. Koumoutsakos, Mr. Chrisochoidis. Yes, Mr. Koumoutsakos, the floor goes back to you.
Thank you. I had a very emotional reaction in my previous intervention because I thought that it is completely unfair to Greece to be accused that we do not respect human rights and rule of law. We reject these accusations fully. As far as the reference that I made to a neighboring country, I don't want to be misunderstood. We need to cooperate as European Union and to discuss with Ankara. But on the other hand, this should be done on strict conditions. They can and they should eradicate the smugglers' networks operating in their coasts. And we need to ask them to produce results. And we have a lot of issues to discuss with them. As EU, it's not a bilateral issue. It's a Greek-Turkish dimension of an EU joint statement and agreement. So, colleagues, I do feel that the message should be sent, should be conveyed by this meeting. That everybody should respect human rights, but as well the security of the other. And I'm afraid to say, and I'm afraid to underline, that what we experienced last March in our borders was not something that is according to EU values and the fundamental principle of good neighborly relations. Thank you.
Okay, now, let's not. Yeah, we noticed that he wasn't answering. But anyhow,
exactly.
I think, we knew that. Are we to be back to him and then again reopen the debate? I think we have substantiated this first round of panel.
So then let's conclude that the Greek government doesn't give any answer to our questions.
Well, actually, yeah, I mean, that is a political assessment which is free to each and every one of us. Okay.
A recording making clear evidence of it.
But I think it shouldn't be matter to simply reopen the debate or give him back the floor and say, hey, listen, would you use a final minute? Try to actually respond to questions. It's so obvious. It is so obvious that he's done his part as you have done yours. Now it's up to each and every one of us to make up our mind as to our political assessment of how this whole thing has been going on. Okay, so I guess for the 45 minutes we still have to go. The best thing we can do is move to the second panel, which will include Fabrice Leggeri, which is the director of Frontex, and it'll be also Mr. Mitarachi from Refugee Support Agent. Let's hear from Mr. Fabrice Leggeri first, then Mr. Mitarachi, and then we reopen the floor for discussion with the coordinators and members willing to contribute. Okay, let's get started with Mr. Leggeri. Fabrice Leggeri, vous êtes là? Director of Frontex, are you there? Yes, there you are.
Yes,
there you are.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, honourable members of the Parliament. I will present Frontex activities at the Greek-Turkish border, and I will start first with an update about our deployment. As you remember, at the beginning of March, there was a request expressed by Greek government to launch a rapid border intervention at the land border, so the so-called Evros rapid border intervention, and to launch a rapid border intervention at the maritime border, so that's the Aegean rapid border intervention. These rapid border interventions were extended several times, and last week it was decided in agreement with the Greek authorities to extend once more until the 6th of September both rapid border interventions, Evros and Aegean. In parallel to this, or let's say on the top of that, we have Poseidon operation, which is the regular maritime operation in Greece, and we are beefing up this operation as well, so that the objective is to increase the number of border guards and Coast Guard officers deployed there in Greece. We have approximately 600 staff there, and my appeal also to all member states was to increase, either to extend the deployment there or to increase their contributions. The reason why this operational footprint was extended and is now being beefed up is that we can expect and predict an increase of irregular migration flows from Turkey to Greece. As we can see, well, the COVID-19 crisis is not over, but nevertheless, in many countries, the lockdown measures and travel restrictions have been eased and relaxed. So with this in mind, we can expect increasing number of flows reaching or trying to reach the Greek territory. Having said that, I can also indicate that return activities is very important as well. This was also announced by Commissioner Johansson and by the Greek ministers. And well, there is a program between the Commission, Frontex and Greece to beef up return. So we agreed at the beginning of March on an EU return program that will be coordinated from an operational perspective by Frontex to support quick returns from Greece. The main activities under this program relate to the support on identification and documentation of returnees. We will also deploy return specialists. We will develop a Greek return case management system. And we will, of course, support return operations. And this will also include voluntary returns in line with Frontex's new mandate. The first target group of around 1,700 returnees, which are all detained in Athens or in the region, have been prioritized, and most of them are at the very end of the asylum procedure. The Commission also allocated 10 more million euro to Frontex in order to ensure that we can support this program. And of course, I can confirm that Frontex stands ready to implement this action plan. As you can imagine, since March, well, return operations were put on hold. There were good reasons for that. All borders were closed in the countries of origin, countries of transit, and Turkey accepted the last readmission on the 5th of March, and since the 5th of March there was no readmission. The official reason for that is COVID-19 pandemic. But we are ready to resume, and we are also working now on alternative solutions. So, for example, we had already on the 10th of June the possibility to offer to Greece to use return flights organized by Frontex and Germany to Georgia, and Greece used this return flight in order to return some Georgian citizens. We can, of course, develop further this return program in the future, taking on board also voluntary return, as I said, and this is in line with the preparations we are making to take over ERIN program and let's say to beef up the return with also an objective to reintegrate the irregular migrants in their country of origin. What I can also say in terms of irregular crossings of the borders, the state of play until now in 2020 is that in Greece it's in the first half of the year there were more than 8,200 irregular crossings through the eastern Aegean. They arrived on the Aegean islands. This means a decrease by 44% compared to the first half of 2019. Of course, the COVID-19 crisis explains this decrease. The main nationalities represented this year are Afghans, that's the top nationality, and then followed by Syrians and many migrants coming from Central African countries. On the land border, there were this year approximately 1,600 irregular crossings registered since the beginning of 2020. This represents a decrease by 52% compared to the same period last year. But here again, COVID-19 and also the rapid border interventions at sea and land can explain this decrease. At the land border, the main nationalities represented are Afghans, Syrians, and Pakistani nationals. What we can also see is that after the riots that took place at the Greek-Turkish land borders in March, you may remember that there were violent riots on the Turkish side, with people throwing stones on the Greek police and Frontex patrols which were on the Greek side. So after these riots that took place in March, we could observe a decrease in the number of irregular crossings in the region. What I can say also in terms of fundamental rights, because this was one of the main topics today, in the context of the rapid border intervention Aegean, so the maritime rapid border intervention, in the first days of March, there was apparently some misunderstanding. There was the instruction that was given by Hellenic Coast Guard to a Danish vessel deployed in the Frontex operation, and those instructions were not in line with the operational plan. And this was immediately recognized and acknowledged by Hellenic Coast Guard. I stepped in also personally in order to clarify the situation, and this was acknowledged that there was a misunderstanding and that there was wrong instructions given, and this stopped this, let's say, wrong instructions in the context of Frontex operations. So this is the case that I can report that took place under the umbrella of Frontex operations. For the rest, again, what we predict is probably an increase of pressure coming from Turkey. We can also witness very complex situation in terms of geopolitical situation there. And we, of course, as an operational agency, cannot comment on political statements, but we can see that the geopolitical context and the volatile situation in the region makes or creates a situation that is very difficult to operate. So that's what I can say from my perspective as Frontex Executive Director. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much for your attention, honourable members of the Parliament.
Okay, Mr. Leggeri, thank you. We thank you for the point of view of Frontex. which is always appreciated. But let's try to move fast because we are coming close to the to this final track in which we encounter troubles with the interpretation system and in all. So let's move ahead. Now the floor goes to second panelist, Mr. Mitsotakis, refugee agent. The floor is yours. Please try to refrain to 5 minutes, please, so that we can so that we can have some round for discussion, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good afternoon to the honourable members of the European Parliament, ministers, Commissioner and Director. Thanks very much for having me in this debate, which I understand, of course, to be a debate directly relating to pushbacks and compliance with fundamental rights at the Greek-Turkish border. So this is what I will try to focus on in terms of the elements we deem problematic and worthy of discussion at the EU level. Members also raised this in the previous panel, but this is really a test to the credibility of the Greek and the EU institutions as guardians of EU law and of the institution of asylum. And in this regard, it is absolutely paramount to that test to see how we engage with what has been described as false allegations, but also what has been corroborated by a wide array of reputable sources. To name again a few: UNHCR, IOM, Council of Europe, reputable media, civil society organizations across the board. So there needs, of course, to be a clear commitment to investigating and to adopting responses based on facts and on reality. What I would like to highlight from the point of view of why those allegations have come, let's say, to light and keep coming to light is that pushbacks do not happen in a legal and political vacuum. They are enabled and often encouraged by systems and policies that are designed to make people stay outside of the European territory and prevent arrival insofar as possible, including arrival of persons who are in need of international protection and express those needs. We heard earlier some of the description of specific incidents. What I can highlight in terms of legal considerations are three things in particular. First of all, right to life and safety of lives at sea, where we see an increasing amount of incidents since the beginning of 2020, where the Coast Guard in the Aegean Sea is refusing to promptly perform rescues, even when informed of boats in distress. Secondly, inhuman and degrading treatment. And there it's crucial to understand that beyond questions of refoulement back to Turkey or further afield, keeping people on board unseaworthy boats for several hours, in some cases we've had reports of even 17 hours adrift, without access to water or food and exposed to extreme weather conditions, including sun and high temperatures, this in itself raises concerns of inhuman and degrading treatment. And the third relates to the duties that we owe to refugees and those procedural obligations that are enshrined in the EU asylum, mainly to provide information at border points when there are indications that people want to seek protection, and to register an asylum claim whenever an asylum claim is made. It is quite encouraging to hear from Commissioner Johansson that the Commission is reflecting on ways to develop mechanisms to ensure proper investigation and follow-up to cases of reported pushbacks at EU level, because of course this is not something that affects Greece and the Greek-Turkish border alone. What is of course necessary to remind once again is that the law is quite clear at this stage. And there are clear responsibilities on the part of the European Commission to monitor and to enforce EU legislation. That includes monitoring how the existing asylum acquis is implemented, specifically the Asylum Procedures Directive, which has clear obligations on member states such as Greece, again, to register asylum applications once those are made, and to have systems allowing for people to be informed at the border when there are indications that they need protection. how is all of this actually applied on the ground? Why has the Commission not produced those implementation reports 3 years after the deadline? And, might I add, after an explicit call from this committee of the House to explain why implementation has not yet happened at the beginning of January 2019, when the previous Commission was invited to provide its reasons. I would also echo that the role of EU agencies such as Frontex is, of course, crucial, given the involvement in the operations and the constant engagement with the Greek counterparts. And in this regard, I would also be interested in more information from Mr. Legeri on any incidents reported since the beginning of this year in the context of both Rabbit and Poseidon. And also, how does this compare to the first half of 2019? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having helped us to catch up and make it sharp. Let's now hear from the designators speakers from the political groups in this second round of questions. We got started by EPP, Mr. Lucas Furlas. The floor goes to you. Connected? Are you there?
Ναι, εδώ είμαι.
Yes.
Λοιπόν, ευχαριστώ κύριε.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I heard outrageous things by some of our colleagues. I heard allegations without proof against Greece. I heard that the Turkish propaganda and Erdogan's propaganda used verbatim. I mean, Erdogan, who did not hesitate to use human lives in order to blackmail Turkey. I mean, I didn't see anyone talking about the Turkish army throwing smoke grenades and stones towards the Greek police. We had seen vehicles bought with European money used in order to breach the European border. And I heard nothing about that. So as the European Parliament and the EU, we have to send today the message that we support fully a member state, Greece, to protect its border against a threat, the EU border. So, and also some colleagues, some people should turn towards their own country and not just keep away when the time of responsibility has come. Thank you.
Now for the S&D, it'll be Dietmar Köster. Dietmar Köster, or is it Isabel Santos? Isabel Santos. Yes, Mr. Köster. Yes, there you go. There you go.
Yes. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the presentations. First of all, I would like to express my solidarity with those of my Greek MEP colleagues who exercise their rights and ask questions based on UNHCR and IOM letters on pushbacks. And they are treated in Greece by the Greek government as traitors or instruments of Erdogan. And I must reject clearly the allegation that all the criticism would base on Turkish propaganda. Do you think that the United Nations and the IOM and even the Commissioner Ylva Johansson are the megaphone of Mr. Erdogan? My first question goes to Mr. Legeri. The Frontex regulation of 2019 stipulates that Frontex should have knowledge of the incidents of the border and coast guards. You should therefore be well informed, as you have mentioned with 600 officials, about the pushbacks of the Greek coast guards, which are now well and really extensively documented last week, for example, in the German television. What information do you have on this? What are you doing to clarify the situation? And what is your assessment? And what are you doing if you are aware of the breach of fundamental rights by the Greek border police? And secondly, from you both, Mr. Legeri and Mr. Mitarachi, I would like to know how the victims of pushbacks who arrived nevertheless the Greek hotspots are treated and how they have access to qualified legal support and how their right to appeal is guaranteed. I would also like to know more about the floating protection plans by Greece they want to install as means of deterrence close to Lesbos. And thirdly, since there is at least one Frontex official in Turkey, I would like to know what happens to people after being pushed back to Turkey. And finally, I await your answer, Mr. Legeri, why I, as a member of the European Parliament, don't receive a reply to my emails to Frontex, which I sent you several, I think, more than 6 weeks ago.
Hey, Mr. Koster, for Renew, it'll be Jan-Christophe Otjen. No, will be you? Okay, there you go. Mrs. Interveld.
Yes, thank you. Unfortunately, he had to cancel his presence at the last moment. No, I actually, I'm not even going to ask any questions anymore about the pushbacks and the incidents at the border themselves because, it's a waste of time. We get no answers. But I am triggered a little bit by something that Mr. Legeri said about the incident with the Danish boat that was part of an operation coordinated by Frontex, who got the order to push back a dinghy with, I believe, 40 refugees or something like that. And you said, oh, that was all a misunderstanding, it was a wrong command, and it has been clarified. I'd like to hear a little bit more about it. How can it be a misunderstanding? If you say push them back, that's very clear. There's no misunderstanding. So where does this misunderstanding come from? And did the person or the organization who gave that, who made the mistake, do they make those mistakes more regularly? I'd really like to understand how this works. And if it was an honest mistake, why did the Danes feel the need to speak about it to the media, you think?
Thank you again, Mrs. Interveld. For the ID, it'll be Peter Kofod. Connected? Mr. Kofod? Not present nor connected. Shall we move to Greens, Damien Carême? It is Eric Marquardt. So, there you go.
Ja, vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. I actually wanted to put some questions to the Greek ministers, but it doesn't seem to be worth it. There's 6 of them here. They had 6 opportunities to take the floor. It sounds like they were speaking at a funeral. They weren't really talking about the topic. They seem to be making a point it wasn't really fair that people were adding additional questions. Now, I don't know the rules of gaming. I'm happy to put €10, however, on the idea that they wouldn't answer any of our questions if we put them in the future. Now, this smacks of a lack of respect for the way that you deal with the Parliament, and maybe we should reflect on how we deal with these operations. I'd also like to ask Ms. Johansson a question, if she can answer me or answer in writing. There are very clear abuses of human rights in the media, including in serious media. To say this is fake news, that is dismissive. Are we saying that everything is fake just because we don't like it? I think maybe Ms. Johansson could give us an answer on this. It would be extremely important to me. Also, it would be nice to hear from Mr. Legeri and Ms. Johansson's answers on the question of when you have a Frontex approach, it seems that there's a systematic abuse of human rights, that this is risky for the Frontex operation. If the curfew for camps is being extended, I really don't understand how Corona is being used as a pretext to extend these operations. Commissioner Johansson was very good in saying that there are European values being abused if there are pushbacks, but it's abuse of European law. It'd be good if the abuse of European law would have consequences attached to it. Thank you.
ECR will be Charlie Weimers. Connected. Weimers?
Thank you very much, Chair. We still outsource border control to President Erdoğan, which allows him to hold Europe hostage. Earlier this year, Erdogan weaponized migrants against Europe and pressured to pay up has not relented. Germany has confirmed that a Turkish soldier fired at German and Greek border guards. Turkey's interior minister has warned that migrants won't be prevented after the corona epidemic. These provocations have been met largely with weakness. Commissioner Johansson demanded Greece continue to allow asylum applications, while Commissioner Varhelyi admitted the EU has given Turkey over €50 million worth of armored vehicles, some allegedly having been used to ram Greek border barriers. Rather than abandoning the tributary policy, High Representative Borrell wants to increase our offer to Turkey. Commissioner Johansson, I implore you to fix the EU's flawed asylum laws so that illegal migrants no longer are rewarded with welfare. Illegal entry should be met with the cancellation of any opportunity to apply for asylum. That's the only way to stop the border being overrun, so that Europe can stop paying tribute to Turkey. Thank you.
And for the GUE, it'll be Kostas Arvanitis. Mr. Arvanitis?
Mr. Arvanitis? Yes. Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ.
Thank you very much. I saw the ministers being upset and rather sad when they heard the word far right. I mean, what am I to say? They tell me that I transmit fake news just because I asked about what organizations like the IOM are saying and the UNHCR is saying. Anyway, I'm moving on so that I will get an answer from Mr. Rezzeri. As you know, in the press, as well as several international organizations have reported on breach of the EU law and the maritime law on the European borders. And this is the issue at hand. Frontex is obliged to protect human rights in the execution of its duties, and at the same time we have Operation Poseidon in effect. At the same time, we can see that Turkey is using the refugees and migrants. So we still have no answer to our questions. At what stage is Operation Poseidon right now? What has Frontex done in order to find out the truth about these allegations? What is the personnel that is taking part into this operation saying to you? Do you have any documentation on the events? Your monitoring possibilities, including Eurosur, are very important. Are you using them so that you will have an early detection of small craft, watercraft, in order to rescue the people that are being pushed back? And that also includes floating tents. And let me come to an end. It is known that the Greek government in the following days will set up a floating barrier of 2.7 kilometers that will set up in the northeast of Lesbos. I mean, is this compatible with the Frontex operation? Is this compatible with maritime law and basic human rights? I would like to remind you of the letter of the MEPs of GUE NGL that we sent you a month ago. I suppose that you are very busy and you haven't answered yet, but we do need an answer today. Thank you very much, because you too are responsible and you are not going to blame only the Greek government. Thank you.
Mr. Arvanitis. Now let's get back to Frontex. Mr. Leggeri to react. Please, if you can make it shorter than the first time, it'll help us. Not to exceed too long the interpretation cabin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much for the questions, honourable members of the Parliament. On the incident that happened during the first days of the rapid border intervention, when a Danish vessel deployed in the Frontex operation was instructed by the Hellenic Coast Guard not to take on board the migrants intercepted at sea, but to return them to Turkey. This was in the first days, and there was clearly, apparently, a misunderstanding of the operational plan. That's why I immediately stepped in order to ask Hellenic Coast Guard authorities to clarify what was the instructions, and they found out that, and this was what was reported to me and to Frontex, that locally an officer of the Hellenic Coast Guard had not understood correctly the operational plan, and that this would not happen again. So I'm just sharing with the Parliament what was reported to me, and this was the only case within the implementation of the operational plan, Rapid Border Intervention Agent, or Poseidon operation. For the rest, I hear sometimes news. I know that there are discussions, reports, by NGOs, by some members of Parliament, asking questions about situations that they consider as pushback. When I have doubts, I ask Greek authorities. I'm doing this in my capacity of the executive director of the agency, though sometimes these are events which are not related to the implementation of the operational plan, but events taking place, occurring in the region where we have nearby our operational areas. When it comes to the floating protection barrier that is planned to be built by Greece, I'm informed, but Frontex is not part of this. And as you all know, member states are sovereign countries, and they have the final say at the external borders. So that's what I could say regarding the questions that were asked. And maybe one last answer. In the last weeks, Frontex got a lot of letters with questions from members of the Parliament. I answered all of them, so if there is one more, I'm ready to answer this in writing if we don't have time to answer orally during the session. And this was the practice that we agreed on, and this is how we managed last time to answer questions also in writing if some members of the Parliament had the impression that their questions were not answered fully during the session. And I remain available, of course, for questions and answer with the members of the Parliament. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Pejeri. We understand that Commissioner Johansson is still connected. So let's hear now from refugee agent and then back to Commissioner Johansson for additional remarks or maybe some additional comments, considering that some questions were still in the air when we had our first round of panelists. Please, now back to Mr. Mitarachi. Can you make it, please?
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very brief. Relating to the question by Mr. Köster on the treatment of victims of pushbacks in either side of the Aegean Sea, the information that we have from the reports and allegations that we've received points to an overall inability of people exposed and suffering pushbacks and violations of rights to have access to legal assistance with a view to substantiating their case before the competent authorities. So, as you know, in the peculiar circumstances of the COVID pandemic in Greece, this has resulted in arrivals being confined in remote areas of the islands. This is mainly Lesbos, where those confinements have been reported and where access to legal representation is not guaranteed. Also, there is no legal obligation on the state to provide legal representation and assistance from the outset of the procedure. And when it comes to Turkey, according to what we have received in terms of information, people returned do not have access to a lawyer, either when detained or afterwards in the process. And this points to a very stark and alarming reality that I think we need to discuss, that the EU as a whole at this moment, even though it maintains a key responsibility in terms of the implementation of migration management vis-à-vis Turkey, has no concrete information on where people are taken post-return, including in the case of pushbacks, and even beyond the actual strict topic of our discussions, there is no concrete and detailed information on where people are taken under readmissions under the EU-Turkey statement, where the details of the Commission at this moment remain extremely scarce and limited, even though this is something that we continue investing political capital in. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mitsotakis. Back to you, Commissioner Johansson. Thank you for being there. Thank you for keeping with us, staying with us. Please, if you may have a second round, it'll be a pleasure to hear from you.
Thank you. I will be brief, and it has been a very interesting and a very good discussion, I think. And I would like to thank LIBE Committee. I think you set this up in a very, very good way with coming to concrete discussions. And I think this is not the last time we have to discuss these kind of issues. When it comes to the Greek borders, I think it was very encouraging to hear, if I understood right, Minister Chrisochoidis, who said that if there are any allegations, he will investigate those. Let's hope that I think this was a good answer. So we will follow up on that. And for the more overall issue, because as I said in my intervention, we have these reports that really concerns me from the Greek border, but also from other external borders of the European Union. And that's why I'm ready to look into whether we need to take any new initiatives in this area. So this is also something that I would like to continue having a dialogue and listen to proposals also from the members of parliament. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Johansson. Now I think that'll do. I see that you're willing to make your own point, Mrs. Sippel.
I'm sorry, normally I don't do it, but I have to do a remark after all the debates that we had today. How can it be that Mr. Leggeri is saying regarding these floating, diese schwimmende Zäune, that this is a case of a single member state protecting their borders in the way they want? But if by such a mean we do avoid the individual right of putting an asylum request, how can that be in line with European laws? And how in such a case can a European agency and all the other actors simply say, oh, it's a national case, we have nothing to do with it? And I only wanted to point out once again that that's ridiculous, it's crazy, it's unacceptable. Either there are European rules and everybody is there to make sure the rules are followed, or we can forget about it. So these answers are really unacceptable. I'm sorry, I will stop here.
And I see also Ms. Strick.
Yes, very briefly, I really have a remark for the Commissioner. It's really to be praised that she really looks into the future to see how we can introduce better mechanisms for enforcement and monitoring. But she's a supervisory body at the moment also. So you can not only refer back to the future and not taking the responsibility for what is happening now. So therefore, we urged her really to recognize these violations, to condemn these violations. People have been killed, and to make sure to us that she is ready to undertake follow-up actions, to do an investigation and to really force the Greek authorities to comply with the obligations and to really look into what has happened, which measures did the Greek government take, and what does the Commission needs to do in order to take measures for repercussions, holding the Greek authorities accountable. Something has to be done also to give an example to other member states. She is referring to other practices, that is true, but therefore we need examples, therefore we need to tackle this impunity.
Commissioner Johansson, are you still there? Are you still there? Are you willing to maybe come up with a conclusive remark? Yes, thank you for staying.
Yes. I'm listening to Mrs. Strick, and of course, it's true that the Commission, there's responsibility for the Commission to act. But I must also say that the Commission do not have a power to investigate how the law enforcement is being applied, how they comply to that in a specific member state. That has to be done by the member state. So that's why I'm also ready to look into whether we should need some more initiatives in this area. But of course, it's true that we have the responsibility to act and make sure that member states follow the EU acquis and the fundamental rights.
Thank you, Commissioner Johansson. I think this is a classical theme in the discussions of the LIBE Committee, in the meetings of the LIBE Committee, in the minutes of the LIBE Committee, in the order of the day of the LIBE Committee. It shows our concern that even in these strenuous and limited circumstances of us, in these painful circumstances in which we're still meeting half remote, half present, with all the limits of having you remote, we show our concern at the highest level possible, and we show not only our concern, we show our state of mind. You have heard about the state of mind of the majority of this LIBE Committee when it comes to violations of human rights of the worst kind in the Greek-Turkish border or elsewhere. So I think we can only say that we are really looking forward to come back to some kind of normal after the summer break and retake all of these issues live, retake you live on stage, Commissioner Johansson, have you live on stage on the podium, Commissioner Johansson, so that we can actually exchange views on the work ahead, which include the programmed new pact on migration and asylum and new legislation, new pieces of legislation to be delivered throughout this mandate of the European Parliament, because believe me, we will be there to make sure that overcoming all these limits of this last round of gatherings of us, we will be accounting for the serious matters that have been again tackled through this particular evening session of the LIBE Committee. And I also say that it is about time that after the summer break we can still have again back on the schedule of the works of the LIBE Committee that Greek delegation of the LIBE Committee being sent to the Greek islands to check on the spot how the situation is like, to interview human beings, people with flesh and blood, live on their testimonies, so that they can enlighten the debate and the positions that are to be taken by the political groups with the occasions of the new pieces of legislation which are to be filling with content the new pact on migration and asylum. So I thank you all for the efforts that you have taken to be part of this discussion, particularly those of you who have made it here, physically here. And we thank also the interpreters for the minutes that they have spared us so that we could finalize the whole round of work without resorting to the usual only English linguistic rule. Thank you so much. Good evening, and we will be seeing more of you this very week. Bye.